Dr. Kaska Porayska-Pomsta will give today the third keynote speech at the JURE conference. Dr. Kaska is a professor of artificial intelligence in education at the Institute of Education at University College London. Her speech will discuss the role of AI in educational research and ways that AI could support human learning. This topic is linked directly to our conference theme, as AI applications are already shaping the future of the field, and the need for dynamic solutions is indicating a new priority for education. Dr. Kaska, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Friday morning. Successful conference, I hope. Thank you very much for having me here. Sorry, I have a very loud voice, so I'll try to moderate it a little bit. So thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for having me here. The subject of this talk is AI and its role, nature, and application, in particular in education. AI and AI in education in particular has been my area of research for almost 3 decades. So hopefully I know a little bit about it. And I want to share some of my reflections to date. And during my time as a student and researcher of AI, I have witnessed varying degrees of interest in AI. But in the past 10 years, as we know, the interest and technical developments in AI have exploded, turning AI from a research lab curiosity to a mainstream commodity. Everyone wants to know about AI, and everyone has something to say about it, regardless of whether they actually have the knowledge of the subject. And so one of the challenges in this context is the noise that surrounds AI. This noise makes it very hard to distinguish between what is real and what is imagined, what is hype and what is actually being developed and deployed, what is and what is not as yet possible. And whilst the noise applies to all areas of AI, it is particularly frustrating in the context of AI in education, which is a field of research which has a relatively long and rich history, but which is presently being both hijacked, for example, by edtech industry, educational technology industry, and ignored for whatever reasons. The reasons are multiple and complex. And now I have to try my skills at moving the slides. Okay, so the main purpose really of this talk is to put AI in education as a field on the map and to get you interested, to get you involved as much as possible, because it is really important to have the entire ecosystem of AI in education, and that includes the engineers, it includes the teachers, it includes the learners, it includes the policymakers, it includes the researchers. It is really important to have all of these stakeholders involved. I cannot in any way do justice to the entire field in a single talk, so I will only offer some highlights of the challenges that the field faces within the current noise, and also I will offer highlights of the predominant paradigms within the field, just to pique your interest, hopefully. So I hope this will serve as pointers for you to engage with the field and its rich research, which I believe should infuse any discussion regarding AI and AI in education. So to provide a wider context, I will examine some of the claims that are being made about AI and AI in education, to outline some of the challenges that these claims raise. And I will also briefly examine how these claims stand up to scrutiny against what we actually know and what this knowledge suggests for the way forward in our approach to and thinking about AI and AI in education. And I will give away the message, the take-home points, to kind of frame your thinking while I speak, and hopefully also to help you generate questions at the end of the session. So the take-home points that I think are particularly important is the first point is that AI in education is a mature field of research. So there is actually a lot to explore there in terms of different ways in which AI is being designed and deployed in real-world contexts, but also in relation to the different pedagogical approaches to learning. So there's a lot of experimentation which is backed with evidence of efficacy, and I will talk about this a little bit later, which deserves to be looked at and pursued with more vigor and thought. AI in education is a field which searches for and delivers evidence of educational efficacy and in some instances effectiveness. So this distinguishes it from a lot of the commercial products that you will see out there that are being pushed down into the mainstream practices in schools. It is also a field which can and should inform AI, so broader discussions around AI. I will not focus on that too much today because this is a talk for AI conferences. It should inform AI in education and applications and development and evaluation and education-related discourse and practices. And it is also a field which points a way forward for how we can nurture the art of learning, to use Pappett's term, by examining what, how, and why we learn and teach. So I will start with a claim. And one of the most startling claims that we hear all around AI is that it puts humanity at an inflection point right now, insofar as the impact of AI is going to drastically change the way that we think and behave. But the problem is that we don't exactly know how these changes will occur and whether this change will be for better or for worse. So just to look at some of, just to look at some of the hopes and fears in broader AI applications. So if we look at the hopes, there are hopes around AI helping us unlock scientific mysteries for advancing, for example, healthcare. So you may be aware of innovations such as AlphaFold, Google DeepMind's AlphaFold, which helped us unlock one of the biggest mysteries in biology and is now also being used directly to help with cancer treatments. We hope that AI may help us make the world a safer place. So this is where the investment, for example, in the autonomous cars resides. And there are also hopes around AI helping us address global challenges, including climate. And in a moment, I will also say what this may mean in the context of education. But there are a lot of fears. And these fears relate to ethical implications and risks of AI for society, for individuals, for our values, and so on. There are also fears about the narrowing of opportunities for learning and rehearsal of fundamental capacities. So if you are using, for example, a GPS to navigate through geographical terrain, you may already have noticed that you are not rehearsing necessarily your geographical navigation skills. So there's a question around that, whether this matters to us and whether these capacities will actually become weaker. And there are also fears around fundamental changes to those capacities. For example, the loss of our abilities to navigate through geographical terrain. And obviously, these capacities are of more or lesser importance depending on our values and context in which we are looking at them. Similarly, if we drill down to the hopes and fears for applications specifically in education, there is a lot of talk around AI helping us innovate education itself, to help us think outside the box, to help us reduce teacher workloads. That one is repeated ad nauseum, and I think we should be debating that. There are also hopes related to delivering learning at scale across different contexts and different geographical regions. And this is a real problem, this is a real challenge for education to be able to reach as many students, as many learners across the globe. And there are hopes around addressing global teacher shortages and related funding challenges. But again, there are fears. Some of these overlap with the broader fears. So there are, again, ethical implications for AI for individuals and society. And these implications need to be examined specifically in the context of AI applications in education, because it's a very special kind of context in which we need to look at the implications for the pedagogies, for the kinds of skills that we are teaching, for the kind of knowledge that we are engendering, and so on. There are fears around narrowing of education curricula to STEM subjects, and this is partly propelled by the fact that actually AI engineers find it easy to encode, if you like, curricula which are STEM curricula, and this is at the cost of ignoring the more kind of nebula, ill-defined domains such as arts and humanities. There are fears around over-standardization of assessment, of pedagogies, of the opportunities for exploration, and so on. And again, there are fears around the fundamental changes that the totality of these different aspects may actually lead to in terms of the perception, beliefs, and social interactions. And all of this is based within a wider rhetoric of education as a system, which is at a breaking point, due to teacher shortages, due to the pressure to teach to exams, and the need for precise measurability of outcomes, and also the emphasis on efficiency, and I repeat, efficiency of teaching and learning rather than efficacy and effectiveness. This rhetoric is both driven and further reinforced by the economic arguments related to the emergent economics of AI. AI is big bucks, basically. And it means big money, and it is projected to generate billions by the 2030s. So there are a lot of conflicting interests which drive the development of AI and the interest, and especially with the emergence of ChatGPT, of AI in education. And this is where the hijacking also comes in to the equation. This rhetoric is actually quite damaging for education, I would argue, because it endorses unregulated, experimental, but not evidence-led interventions in live contexts. And it's damaging because it routinely excludes key stakeholders from contributing both to the discourse around AI ed and the co-creation of AI ed, and ultimately also it excludes key stakeholders from decisions about what we learn and teach and how and why we do so. Okay, so let's look at the problem. One of the problems. And one of the key problems, one of the key issues here, which prevents us from asking meaningful questions, is the fact that both constructs of education and AI are being notoriously overgeneralized. And because there is inadequate expertise invited to the proverbial table. So I will now elaborate on this a little bit more. I will start with the typical AI myths. Some of you who attended the Ethics of AI workshop yesterday will be familiar with this slide. So there are many different conceptions of AI, and none of them actually, as you see them on the slide, are correct on their own. They kind of are descriptions of the folk ideas of what AI is, sometimes generated from popular science or from popular culture. Some of them are basically reflections of what is currently the hot topic in AI. So some people, when asked what AI is, will equate AI with a human. Some will say that artificial intelligence is basically human intelligence. Prior to ChatGPT, AI was typically equated with robots. Some of those who know about AI through the prism of machine learning, because that was a hot topic, well, it became a hot topic some 10, 15 years ago. If they know that these approaches are being inspired by human brain and how we think the human brain works, then they will equate that with machine learning and so on and so forth. And more recently, I bet you that if you were to ask anyone what AI is, the first thought would be ChatGPT and LLMs, which, by the way, ChatGPT and LLMs are not the same thing. That's for another talk. Okay. So in the context of both public discourse around AI and education, and by extension AI in education, there seems to be a prevalent tendency to generalize the two domains or constructs as some homogeneous monolithic entities. And so while we may take these two images on the screen as somewhat archetypal of some idea of education and some idea of AI, they are far from representative of the complex ideas and subsystems and values and technologies that they represent. Just as not all education and learning is about small, white children and a classroom fronted by a female teacher, not all AI is about robots or machine learning or indeed ChatGPT. And before I go to the next slide, and unless we are able to actually nail down what it is that we are talking about, any attempt at innovating in this space will be hindered. Unless we become concrete, any attempt at predicting the future, and a lot of people are trying to predict the future in the context of what AI is going to do in education, how can we use AI in education, and so on. All of these predictions, all of this second guessing will amount to something akin to making potentially life-changing decisions based on a daily horoscope in a tabloid newspaper. So unless we start from the concretes, any attempt at governing AI and any attempt at determining the future will fail. So at least one of the causes for this overgeneralization of AI ed in the wider discourse is that we allow for education with all its complexities and layers and contexts and values to be treated by technologists as a wumpus problem. How many of you know what a wumpus problem is? Okay, good, because I will tell you. So a wumpus problem is actually one of the classic problems in AI, which offers a very rich environment. It's one of the favorites for beginning AI students. And that is because it provides a rich environment in which to solve problems under uncertainty, in which to make decisions, in which to plan, and in which to take action. The problem is essentially a bit like a grid game, as you can see on the screen, where the player needs to navigate various obstacles, including smelly pits and a monster called Wumpus. The user is being given clues to do this navigation. So I won't go into any more details of this problem. You can probably go to Russell and Norvik's classic Bible textbook on AI, and this is where you will find a very full description of that along with the exercises, if you so desire. But suffice it to say that from the AI perspective, it is a relatively complex world to navigate through. Nevertheless, despite its technical complexity, it is not the real world. And this is not a world which is representative of the complex human environment of different educational contexts where the human development and learning is very much at stake. Yet, this is exactly how non-learning scientists and non-AI ed experts represent and talk about AI in education, and sometimes about education. This is how they talk about education when you talk to them. And so this leads to a lot of sometimes quite ridiculous claims and decisions being made at different levels of decision making. Here I include a couple of examples from the past 12 months from newspaper articles about AI and AI in education. The first is a Guardian interview with a leading expert proclaiming the end to traditional school classroom, which is spelled by AI. So the interesting thing is, and I was really irritated by this article, as you probably will guess, the interesting thing is that we are not told what this expert is leading in. And it turns out it is an interview with Stuart Russell, who is famed, among other things, for writing the textbook that I have just mentioned, where the Wumpus problem is in prominence. He is otherwise an extremely knowledgeable man on AI. He just simply is not an expert in either education or AI in education. And it's notorious. Actually, we see these kinds of articles coming out very frequently with people who are asked about AI in education simply by virtue of being experts in AI, by being engineers. The second example is an article in the Times from the end of last year, covering a story of a school in Sussex in England hiring an AI deputy head teacher to help teachers in their practices. And curiously, and this really rang multiple alarm bells, curiously, the help is predominantly to be had with neurodiverse pupils. Apart from issues of accountability of doing something like this, for anyone familiar with neurodiversity, this claim should ring alarm bells like they did for me. These alarm bells are regarding the inclusion or lack thereof, and regarding safety and safeguarding against any harms and biases which may be encoded in this, frankly, gimmick. I don't mince my words when it comes to those things, so if I offend anyone, I apologize. Okay, so this leads me to the part of the talk where I want to look at what it is that we do know in AI in education. And one of the things that we definitely do know is that neither education nor AI are monolithic things. And so we really do know that talking about them in such a way will not get us very far. We also know that the focus on drill and practice, and this is actually a prediction from 1900. This is a real thing. We also know that the focus on drill and practice instructionism, where the teacher acts as a transmitter of information, is a very limited and often damaging model of education, not least because it has nothing to say about how and why humans learn. It is a model that attempts to fit the learner to a prescribed environment rather than adapting the environment to the learner to build on their strengths and to motivate them. This model represents, by and large, the low-hanging fruit for many so-called AI-ed commercial products being sold on the market today. And this was indeed picked up by Paolo Blinkstein in his 2018 keynote at the International Conference of AI in Education. And in this lecture, Paolo addressed the misconceptions that non-education experts and practitioners have about education, especially in the context of AI, its purpose and role for learning and teaching. He was doing so in the context of highlighting the prevailing trends in the broad ed-tech to grasp the so-called low-hanging fruit of education as a domain for their applications. So I put these misconceptions under the efficiency and measurability argument, where the needs and practices on the ground are defined very much in terms of the need to get as much for as little effort as possible. Under this mindset, we hear then that teachers need to be rescued from repetitive and boring tasks, that teaching is about explaining things time and time again, that learning is about, that actually learning is also about repeating things time and again, and that both somehow rely on breaking content into tiny pieces. However, we do know from decades of patient research across different fields in the learning sciences, that none of this covers the full extent of how we learn and what teaching is about. So I put these lessons learned under the efficacy and effectiveness argument, because they highlight that what matters is whether we have evidence that what we do has either a chance of succeeding, so this is the efficacy part, or is indeed successful in making a desired change. So this is the effectiveness part. And so under this evidence-based argument, talking about the need for automating certain tasks of teachers as a way of rescuing them from boredom is not about teaching or learning or giving teachers more time to be better teachers, but it is about economics and politics, where teachers' autonomy, rather than being enhanced, is likely to decrease markedly. And this is it should at least be an open question for all of us. Under this view, learning is not about explanation, but about active construction of knowledge under the view of efficacy and effectiveness. It is not about repetition, but about constant situated and contextualized negotiation and equilibration of old and new theories. And frequently, learning does not require or benefit from atomic content, but from appreciating that sometimes complex things are easier and more interesting to learn than the simpler ones. And here comes Puppet again. And this is why we might do well to actually look toward to long record of research and evidence generated by the AI-ed community, which operates under the International Society of AI in Education. For that research and that evidence points to a very different and much more diverse and rich view of what education and learning and teaching are and might be in the future. And the overarching level, at the overarching level, the work of AI Ed community offers both a challenge and a different approach to the standard model of AI in education. And here comes the standard model of education, the standard model of AI in particular, but it is actually entrenching also the model that is applied in AI in education. The standard model of AI involves an AI agent which blindly pursues a predefined goal or a set of predefined goals by any means available to it, and which is being rewarded for its actions that it achieves for achieving a goal. And so there is a reinforcement loop within this process. In this model, AI is in charge, and it is the AI's autonomy to select actions that is emphasized, not the human autonomy. And this is actually the model which is on which all of the AI systems at the moment are being based. And I think it's worth recognizing that. Actually, amongst other people, Russell Stewart is beginning to challenge this standard model and is starting to talk about different ways in which we can implement these things to give people, to give humans a greater autonomy and a greater choice of decisions. So in its origin, and indeed in many ways, AI Ed also utilizes the standard model. It is a field that draws aggressively from a large number of advanced computational techniques to build a wide variety of systems to help learners in authentic learning context. And as such, at the beginning of its endeavors, the emphasis was very much on finding ways to scale up best educational practices known at the time in the context of one-to-one tutoring for mastery learning. I bet that all of you are recognizing this figure because this is the Bloom's 2 sigma effect study, which actually provided the main inspiration for AI Ed right at the beginning. In this study, Bloom, in 1984, provided evidence of the greater effectiveness of one-to-one support to mastery learning approaches over classroom instruction, showing that learners in the one-to-one condition outperformed classroom learners by 2 standard deviations. And so everyone, this has become a holy grail for AI in education for at least a couple of decades, and it still persists in some quarters of the field. However, considering that one-to-one tuition is not a feasible option in a typical educational circumstance, because of the expense and time and resources, the evidence provided by Bloom has been this is why the Bloom's study has been such a key motivating factor in developing AI solutions that could support individualized learning in an adaptive manner. And this is where the strengths of AI and the autonomous kind of decision-making that AI is capable up to a point within the standard model has become so attractive. So intelligent tutoring systems and adaptive learning environments are such an attempt. I'm caricaturing here, obviously, but just to give you a shortcut to the idea. But over time, the community, collectively and individually, allowed itself to take a step back and research and reflect on the nature of the art of learning. It expanded, and it continues to expand its horizons by seeking knowledge from other disciplines and to pursue evidence of the efficacy and effectiveness, again, those 2 words, of its approaches in the real world, at the front line of education. So there are some overarching AI ed paradigms, or the main paradigms within AI ed, with the overarching kind of motivation and idea that the human should remain in the loop. And this approach, this motivation involves the understanding that best practices and of learning and teaching need to concentrate on active and situated construction of knowledge, on metacognitive competencies, on formative assessment and self-assessment, and that they need to be ethically grounded, including the focus on diversity, inclusion, transparency, accountability, and the questions of who is in charge in the relationship between AI and the human. The specific paradigms, and I will not have time to go into any one of them in detail. Again, this is to give you a highlight of the main paradigms that you will find and which are backed with substantial efficacy evidence, and in some cases effectiveness. Research in the field involve systems which focus on didactics with constructivist feedback mechanisms. For example, there's a lot of work that has been done on help seeking, and one example which is actually used in mainstream schools in the US and in some other countries are cognitive tutors. These typically focus on well-defined STEM domains, but they take a pretty enlightened approach and are being informed by psychological studies and cognitive science as well. Another paradigm involves open-ended learning environments, and it's one of my favorite paradigms, where learners become teachers and where AI essentially acts as a prop for exercising your knowledge by teaching when you are a learner. There are some notable examples of systems such as Betty's Brain, for example, which were developed at the Vanderbilt University. I'm just giving you kind of highlights of places where these approaches have been studied substantially, but of course, many other people study those things. The fourth paradigm is about exploratory learning environments. So this really marked this ELEs, as we call them for short, because they are very difficult to pronounce for foreigners like me. They are focusing on inquiry-led learning. And they really marked a shift from this ITS, drill and practice, mastery learning approach into new ways of thinking about how we can utilize technology to support exploration and inquiry. There are many examples of both well and ill-defined domains. So, for example, for mathematics, my colleague Manolis Mavridis has worked a lot on math systems within this context of ELEs, and also in ill-defined domains, such as, for example, social interaction, inclusion, and communication. And the final paradigm that I want to talk about is open learner models. These essentially are, and they date back to late 90s, they essentially focus on the idea that the learners should be given access to their own data, and that this data can be used to support self-explanation, metacognition, collaboration, and so on. And it is to my mind, this approach actually represents the future, for better future of AI ed. There are numerous examples, but the notable authors are Susan Bull and Judy Kay, who have written extensively. They have been the pioneers in this field. And there are multiple wonderful papers that they have written, including a framework for open learner models, which I would encourage you to look at if you're interested in this domain. One example, I will give you just a couple of examples from my own research, of course, because it's my keynote, so I'm allowed. So in the ELE's context, this was a system which we have developed for supporting young children on the autism spectrum to rehearse social communication skills. And the idea behind this system was to provide children with opportunities for and rehearsal of social communication skills and opportunities for exploration of those skills in an interaction with an artificial agent, with an AI agent. It was also, the idea was to support specific skills such as turn-taking, also the theory of mind, the ability to initiate and respond to bids for interaction. But the idea was to actually do it in a playful way, which really motivated children to continue exploring. But what was also interesting, I'm not deliberately not providing statistics because there are papers out there which I'm sure if you're interested you can read and it will be much more meaningful than me giving you a slide with stats. One of the things that was really cool about this project was that, and it was a real discovery that we didn't cater for in the first place, was that the system itself provided a point of interest for the children to interact with others around them. So these could be teachers, this could be other children, this could be researchers during the studies. And for many of these children, it really created an environment where they felt safe to interact in a way that they were not observed to interact during classroom interactions. So it kind of opened up the box for the teachers as well, because in many cases, the teachers actually didn't realize that some of the children were capable of particular forms of interactions, that they were verbal, for example, in some cases. And so that changed their approach to the support that they provided those individual children. Another example from another project, this looks at open learner models much more specifically, is AI for self-reflection. So this system was a European project where we developed an AI agent that acted as a job interviewer for young people at risk of social exclusion through unemployment. And so the agent itself provided an opportunity, again, for rehearsal of particular social interactions, and data was collected during this interaction, multimodal data, including facial expressions and gestures that were made by the interviewees. Again, young people could explore what works, what doesn't work in the interactions. They could also explore another agent's, another person's reactions in real time. But what was really cool about this project, that was really cool, but what was even more cool, and specifically in relation to the educational opportunities that it provided, was the fact that we then provided the data back to both the learners and practitioners who were supporting this form of learning. And this offered learners an opportunity to inspect what they did and what they didn't do, to explain what they did and why, or to dispute their own interaction behaviors. And it also gave the practitioners an opportunity to have really concrete and targeted conversations, not only with the learners that they were supporting, but also with themselves. And that was really interesting to see how the interactions have changed from arguing about whether the learner has made a particular gesture which was inappropriate in an interview, to actually saying, you see, this is what happened, so let's discuss why this has happened, why this is appropriate and inappropriate, and so on. And another interesting thing was that it actually changed the way that the practitioners who were participating in this project, it was actually a mission locale, which is an organization which functions across France, which provides this kind of support to young people, and it changed the way that the practitioners actually discussed with themselves how they go about supporting individual learners. Again, there are papers written about this, so if you're interested, you'll find them relatively easily. Okay, so the one thing that I wanted to spotlight also before I conclude is that I just wanted to kind of emphasize this, extra emphasize it, that there are some overarching driving principles and also evidence that is available within the field of AI Ed. It is learning need driven, the research within AI Ed. It is context need driven. It does focus on best pedagogical practice and evaluation of those practices. And it also derives from theory, existing practices, and evidence, but it also feeds back, obviously, to all of those things. And all of these components are providing the basis for the design, evaluation, and deployment of AI in education systems. So just a few pointers for where you can find information about the society's work. There is a journal and also a recently published handbook of AI in education, which is very involved, but it's super cool, with a lot of, basically all of the areas of substantial concern for AI Ed researchers. And another thing that I wanted to say is that, just kind of wrapping things up, that the role of AI Ed in supporting human learning, certainly when we look at it through the prism of the AI Ed research, is not one thing, and is definitely not predominantly a solution or a product. It's much more about the methodology. AI as a methodology for allowing us to conduct exploration of how we learn, how we teach, what constitutes a best practice, how can we change the way that we do these things. And it provides a relatively safe environment. I mean, we can run simulations. We can now create simulated teachers and learners if we want. There are caveats, risks to do with data. But in any case, it's a very useful tool. And for a lot of people who have entered into the AI field, not just AI, but AI field, this was the predominant reason for that. And it is also an applied philosophy, because ultimately it allows us to, it's a paradigm within which we can ask questions about what makes us human at a very fundamental level. So, a couple of points, 4 points for consideration. In our effort to shift from worshipping the algorithms to investing in supporting new generations to support the art, supporting the art of learning, it is important to consider the interdisciplinary work and evidence in front of us. And in order to make informed decisions about how we move forward, it is important to allow ourselves to look back and take stock of the knowledge that we already have. It is also important to consider carefully who is invited to the proverbial decision-making table and why. And of course, interdisciplinarity and co-creation and collaboration are easier said than done. So, knowing the knowledge paradigms of the different stakeholders is essential in making the right choices and to ensuring that gaps in knowledge and expertise are addressed and that a representation of different perspectives is available. Knowledge paradigms and different expertise matters a great deal because it can either provide a balanced, considered, and informed view, or it can tilt the balance towards a more narrow, Wumpus-like view. What we see at the moment in the context of AI discourse at policy and public levels is tilted towards a technocentric and economic view where education is a market and learners and teachers are consumers. This is a situation where critical experts and practitioners in education, like yourselves, the learning sciences and also AI in education experts are critical but are notoriously excluded by design or through ignorance. They are excluded from partaking in the shaping of the thinking about the future of education and the future of learning for the next generations. Even if we do seemingly have all the necessary expertise, it is important to pay attention to the incentives that the different stakeholders have. As with paradigms, incentives matter and may significantly affect the level of commitment of the stakeholders to the questions and decisions that are being made. For the work on paradigms and incentives, I refer you to the work by one of my doctoral researchers, Isaac Ndi Asare, who elaborates on the questions of how they may affect whether or not different stakeholders may successfully engage with one another to achieve concrete action collectively. Paradigms and incentives are tightly linked with values that different people bring to the table. Two entrepreneurs might not be alike. One may value making quick buck over making a real difference, while another may only want to genuinely make the world a better place. And finally, competencies matter a lot. From professional competencies to technical competencies, and the lack of the latter, in particular among educators, is the subject of growing concern, because without such competencies, educators are disempowered in making informed decisions and truly be able to innovate their practice, especially with AI. Under the circumstances which we experience right now, where much of the narrative around AI in education is driven by others than educators, this is a major issue for the happy future of learning by the next generations and for our ability to foster the art of learning. And here I refer you to another of my doctoral students, Giles Bennett, who is also a practicing teacher, and who researches what teacher competencies and support mechanisms for teachers are needed, but lacking in the context of AI for and in education. And on that note, I will thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Kaska, we would like to thank you for your wonderful speech. And let's now proceed to a couple of questions, if there are any.
Thank you very much for your really nice talk. I had a question that you actually already put on your slide, because you addressed this question like that AI can also help us to reflect on what makes us human. And what are the first answers to that question?
That we are very messy and very biased. This is something that we have discussed actually in the workshop, some of it indirectly, but bias is a real problem. Lack of knowledge is another problem, because to build these environments, we do actually furnish those environments with knowledge. I mean, depending on your AI paradigm, knowledge-based systems require knowledge, data-driven approaches require data, but both are biased. They are the products of what we know and what we don't know. They are the product of what we encode, our prejudices, and so on. So these are predominant things. But we also have learned quite a lot by exploration, specifically in AI in education, that particular capacities matter more. I mean, that we should value them more than what has been traditionally and continues to be traditionally valued in education. So I already mentioned a number of times drill and practice, instructionism, and there is a time and place for those things, but they shouldn't be exclusively the things that we do in education. And increasingly, when we think about, you may be familiar with 21st century skills, I say kind of ironically, the questions around how do we become more aware of our environment? How do we become more resilient? How do we become more inquisitive? Well, a lot of the things that have been researched and continue to be researched within the field of AI Ed focus on that. They focus on, as I said, metacognition, self-reflection, inquiry, collaborative learning, and so on. And I should add, I keep saying AI in education simply because it seems to be like a, poor child of all the other fields that people, like of AI, mainstream AI fields, or of the learning sciences and educational research. But the field really draws heavily on all of the fields around it, all of the cognate fields, and it doesn't discriminate just because a field is called a certain name. So, neuroscience and neuroscience in education, for example, is coming in very strongly, either as a motivator for formulating questions or as an approach for interrogating those questions, or both. I don't know whether I answered your question, but...
Well, yes, you did.
I encourage you to go to the AI Ed journal. It has actually become extremely popular in the past 5 years. We get more submissions than we can handle. But there is research there that goes back to the early 80s that people should, I think, take heed of.
Doctor, thank you for your presentation. I'm very happy about what you have presented, because I am a teacher by profession, and I have background of teaching pedagogy knowledge. And I was very happy about the point when you talk about many driving principles and evidence about AI in education. But I was wondering about the balance between hopes and fear, or in other words, the cons and the pros of AI in education. So no doubt that as a teacher by profession, AI has many advantages and a promise advantages. Learning need driven basic pedagogical practices and so on. Now my worry, and maybe something for you to clarify, how can we balance between these best practices of using AI in education and disadvantages? I can just try to give an example about AIs and the learning theories. I could see when you were just presenting, there was one of the keynote given by someone. I was just wondering, how can we balance? For example, when I was young, when I was doing my primary education, just learning, for example, multiplication of numbers, we did by repetition. one of the learning theory, I think they say that we can learn better by repetition. Young people can just learn multiplication, so lucky. But nowadays you see everything is done by the AI. Now, apart from having best practice of AI in education, we can see that there is a danger of AI also killing human cognition. Now, how can we balance? Because pro and cons are there. But for future living, how can we balance this issue? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. This is a very profound question, which I'm asking myself a lot. And what I can say is that, and based on what I see, is that we really need to work as an ecosystem. At the moment, and please tell me if you feel the same, I see that certain stakeholders, let's be concrete, teachers, educators, people who actually are working at the front line, are notoriously excluded from the co-design of these systems. They are not excluded from the co-design within research, but research, what you will find in the AI ed field is research mainly. There are few examples of research projects that have been scaled up into the mainstream practices simply because of the way that academia works and how the funding works and what skills are being available. And so we do need to, in order to scale up, I will talk about the scaling up and then I will talk about the quality next. So scaling up requires a collaboration with the edtech industry because they have the skills and the means to actually deliver frontline kind of systems at the front line, but they don't have the research background. They're not driven largely by research evidence. They don't have the skills that the researchers have. Now, in terms of the quality, they also lack very often an idea of what quality education is, and even of the multiple different ways that you can actually teach something or that you can learn something. There is a very kind of and this is actually the problem with overgeneralization. A lot of people think that they know about education simply by virtue of having been educated or having gone to school. And so this is where the hijacking of the developments within AI ed comes in, and of the field comes in, which I think we really do need to not only resist, but we need to engage very actively in changing. And how do we change this? Well, the only way that I see this changing is by involvement of the people who actually know how to teach, how learning happens. They know what happens at the front line, and not just in general, but actually right now in their classrooms with their students in year 7 or whatever. And this is very much lacking. This kind of ecosystemic approach whereby everyone who stands to benefit or lose from the introduction of these new tools, which are exciting in principle, but whose effect we don't really appreciate fully, that all of the people involved in this ecosystem are brought into the co-development, co-evaluation, and the exact processes remain to be to be developed, and to be understood. But the one thing that is, and it's actually emerging also in the discussions at the policy levels and the recommendations that are being drawn up for responsible AI more broadly, is that one thing that we are lacking is an ecosystem, an ecosystemic mindset. So that requires teachers and educators and schools to shift the mindset from being the recipients of the technologies that somebody else produces, from being the consumers of these technologies and being basically told that they have to introduce these technologies magically into their practice and make sure that the good quality of their practices is maintained, to active participants in decision-making about what matters, what constitutes value in their classroom, what are the needs on the ground. So this is a huge gap. And that's why I gave this talk. Because you are the next generation of people who need to be involved right now.
So would like to thank again Dr. Kaska, and thanks for everyone for being here. So let's now proceed to the coffee break.